It's a matter of perspective. So, in Buddhist philosophy, there is a famous sermon that the Buddha gives called the Flower Sermon. And in this lecture, kind of that he held, he just held up a flower. It wasn't a spoken word lecture like we're thinking of, like we usually think today. And in doing so, one of his disciples, after some time of observing the flower, smiled. And it is understood that direct wisdom was transferred from Buddha to his disciple because the smile was a reflection and expression of understanding. So now, as I create this sort of fractal flower, a very simple artistic exercise, in essence, I'm studying a flower and its patterns. And often, for artists, you'll hear that art is very meditative in a way. And sure, in this way, it's bringing up, on the one hand, the flower sermon, and on the other hand, personal experiences, but insofar as personal perspective. And by that, I mean that usually in a sort of binary way, there is a good or bad way to look at things, a cynical or optimistic way, a right or wrong, however you want to label it. But to exemplify this, we can juxtapose the flower sermon and the Netflix movie Bandersnatch. In the movie Bandersnatch, it gets to a scene where an older game designer is kind of, making this pattern over and over and over again, and it kind of drives him crazy. But the pattern is one of choice and consequence, right? So he makes a choice, it leads him to another, it leads to kind of an effect or a consequence, and then there's a choice to be made from there. And it's kind of like a Plinko machine. If you look at the symbol itself, it's almost kind of has a brick laid pattern, in that it's kind of a square and then a line coming out from above the square, kind of centered. And then if you look at a family tree, it's very much like that pattern. And so in looking at it from a negative perspective, it may feel like there's no free will, like there's no choice, like we don't have control over our lives, or like someone else is controlling it. And it's, if seen from that perspective, it's very disempowering. If you study a flower, however, if you bring into mind the other perspective of the flower sermon and this exercise that I'm doing now, there are things that we regard as very beautiful and appreciate. We appreciate them. And it is only because they have this very simple, almost basic, fundamental repeating pattern that allows their simplicity, their beauty to shine through. And when we perpetuate the victimized mindset, it can feel like we don't have choice over our lives or control over the direction that we're taking, the path that we're on. But if you can boil it down to that simple pattern, it is then that you might be able to actually change it when you accept it, when you see it, or even appreciate what it is and not necessarily have to change it. So a flower starts in, the center, very small circles, very minute detail, and then it comes out into smaller petals that form a ring around the center, and then petals around those petals, and then petals around those petals. And in that way, we have like a core self, and that's our center. And then the petals around that are our life experiences, our friends, our family, people who reflect our center, our own pattern. And from there, a life is built around that. And under the victimized mindset, it can be perceived as a very deformed, unworthy, ugly flower. But when looked at through the filter, through the perspective of someone who appreciates flowers and nature, there really is no such thing as an ugly flower.